What's that again? So we've grabbed Rami from glabbed. Laugh it up, laugh it up. I will get it. Third time lucky. So we maybe not.
we grabbed 5 minutes with Rami Ismail from Vlambeer.
And then spent that whole time doing the introduction to this video. But once we've got over that, we are going to spend a few minutes talking about stuff kind of external to the video games, Luftrausers and Nuclear Throne that Vlambeer have released recently, and kind of talk about the industry from a wider sense. I mean, one of the things that kind of we've spoken about in conversations over the last day or so, we've talked about the kind of the relationship and the ease of the relationship that you've had with PlayStation and Sony, and getting your games onto those platforms. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what it's been like working with them recently, especially, and how receptive they've been since, you know, the PlayStation 4's been announced and bringing indie games to that platform?
I mean, the way we started working with Sony was really simple. They reached out to us. They were starting this thing called PlayStation Mobile, which is a separate store on PlayStation Vita, and they needed a fun little arcade game that people knew about on the platform. So they reached out for us for Super Crate Box on PlayStation Mobile. And we took the project because the guy that we were talking to, Shahid, we felt that he cared, right? And that's unique. You don't get that often in the industry, especially not with the larger companies, that you genuinely feel that this person knows your work and cares about your work and wants your work to exist on their platform. So we worked with them on Super Crate Box Mobile, and we had a good experience with them. So we were visiting London, and Shahid and us ended up talking a bit, and we were actually in a pretty similar situation as here. And he asked us whether we had any other games. So we said, well, we're working on this airplane game called Luftrausers. And he said, okay, and he grabbed a coaster and a pen, and he started writing the name of the game on the coaster. And he said, what do you need? I'm like, well, we haven't really thought about it, but yeah, sure. How about we want some marketing, and we want some of this, and we want some of that, and we want a PlayStation dev kit and a PlayStation Vita dev kit. And I just wrote all the things down. And then he said, and I want Luftrausers. We're like, okay. Then he said, sign here. So we signed the game on a coaster. And then when I got back, the dev kits were already there. And we got the full contract to sign. So that was the way we started working with Sony. And that is exactly how we want to do business. It's not the whole dancing with contracts and spending time on that sort of stuff. We want to get to the point, which is we want to make games and they want to get games to their players, right? That's what the games industry is about for me. And that's what it's about for them. And from that point on, I've gotten to know more people within Sony, and through the PlayStation 4 launch and through us announcing Nuclear Throne for PlayStation 4 and Vita, they've actually sort of remained exactly the same. Like, the fun part about dealing with Sony is that we're dealing with people, and we're not dealing with people in a specific position. We're just dealing with people that genuinely are excited about our games and that play our games all the way up to the top. And that's just really exciting to be talking to human beings about games, because I guess a lot of people don't really think about it that way, but when you say Vlambeer and Sony are making a deal, like, you're not talking about like big corporations talking to each other through lawyers. You're talking about me literally sitting down and having a conversation with somebody, and the way they treat us and the way we treat them is really just people. Like, we're people talking to each other and making deals. And I think Sony really nailed that. Like, they got that. They got that for independent developers. It's about the game. They basically have pretty much zero rules. Like, you can launch your game on Xbox first and on PlayStation later. You can launch your game on PlayStation 3 or Vita, PlayStation 4. Like, they don't really care about any of that. They just want to make sure that if you have a game and it's a good game, it can exist on their platform. And that's wonderful. It's been amazing.
Do you feel like you found them at the right time? Because, I mean, recently they've been really pushing into the indie space and really championing smaller, more interesting experiences, and kind of not just exclusively following the AAA ticket. And do you think that has been good for you as a company, as well for that, as for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like, let's not Let's not forget that during the PlayStation 3 era, Sony was probably the worst partner to be dealing with. Like this is a really, really recent thing, and I think Super Crate Box on PlayStation Mobile was absolutely the vanguard of this whole thing happening. It was literally the first push into indie they made. So we were there exactly at the right time with the right game, and we talked to the right people, and that just sort of happened. Or actually, the right people talked to us, I guess. But yeah, no, I mean these things are waves, right? They're not a static thing. Like the field changes, new consoles come out, new platforms come out, the industry shifts, and sometimes you're in the right spot at the right time, and that definitely helped us. But I think in the end it also really helped Sony, because you look at the Vita right now, and that thing was declared dead. And I mean it's still not the best-selling console in the world, but hey, I mean it's got a pretty happy following of indie game enthusiasts. And to be honest, if anybody is going to ask me like where do I play indie games at the moment, it's going to be PC or Vita for me. That's where I play my games.
People who have the Vita tend to speak very highly of it as well. I mean, I can't think of a single person who has one of those who doesn't use it or doesn't like it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a feature-rich console, and that screen is great for kind of gaming on the go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I think Lufthouse on Vita is the best version we have. I mean, it's nice on PlayStation 3. It's nice on PC, Mac and Linux. I'm proud of that game, but having the game with me and being able to quickly play a game is really, really fun. I mean, they did a really good job of doing that, and I think they've been doing really well at listening to the consumers. I mean, E3, PlayStation versus Microsoft was ridiculous. That was the first time in the industry that I've seriously seen a platform just hand out a smackdown. Like they just normally they dance around each other. They say our direct competitors, and here Sony just walked up to Microsoft and points them in the face, and it was really funny. And sort of sad, because I was worried. I mean, I like competition. I don't want Sony to be the only platform. On the contrary, I want there to be as many platforms as possible, and I want all of them to be as good for indie games as possible. So I was really amused to see E3 happening, but I was also worried because Microsoft was obviously not doing well at that time.
They're doing a bit better now, though. They've started certainly making more interesting moves into the indie space. Have you kind of had any dealings with them, and what kind of working relationship have you got with them? Is it you kind of negotiating through the ID Xbox?
So we signed up for ID at Xbox before it was announced. So Vlambeer was one of the first studios you reached out to, and we've been dealing with Chris Charla, who is the head of ID at Xbox, and he's a wonderful guy. He is another one of those people that you know he genuinely cares and he really wants this to succeed. I think Microsoft has some catching up to do. But I think with ID at Xbox, to be honest, the Xbox One, the fact that it's even a viable competitor in the console market right now is a major victory for Microsoft, because E3 is going to go into marketing history books as one of the biggest disasters in PR ever, in any product category ever. And then the way they turned that around and still made Xbox One a viable platform and a thing that people want and that people support is going to go into the history books of marketing as a major victory for a company. And I think ID at Xbox was a really clever move at exactly the right time. And what Microsoft did really smartly is they branded it. Like ID at Xbox is an actual program with intent to help indie developers out. Indie developers get 2 dev kits, stuff like that. I mean, this is not different from what Sony does. Like ID at Xbox is not that different from what Sony does, but Microsoft branded it. Like they put it out in the open and they just said like, this is the deal, this is how it works. There's no talking about specific things. Like this is it. Like here it is, here's the full thing, and let's do that.
They really needed to do that though, didn't they? Because when they first, one of the things that struck me when they first started talking about the PlayStation was, the PlayStation 4, was there was such a myriad of different experiences from AAA down to indie, and they really had that. They might not have had as many kind of killer AAA titles, well, what looked at the time to be killer AAA titles. They might not have had quite so many of them, but they certainly had a much wider selection of games. So they really did need to pull something out of the bag, didn't they?
I think the interesting thing about the myriad of experiences, I think a lot of that is actually was achieved by Sony through the Vita. Like they got developers aboard through the Vita. They made sure that they had a good experience working with Sony, and then at E3, the only moment they used all of the screens they had on stage because they had a lot of screens on stage. The only moment they used all of the screens was while they were showing the indie games. And that's such a commitment. Like, there were 2 screens on that stage that were just there for indie games. Microsoft needed to catch up, right? And they needed to do that desperately. And they did that well. And I just mentioned that they are transparent about their process. And I would be able to get 100% behind ID at Xbox if that was completely true, but it is not. Microsoft has one rule that Sony does not, and we've been talking to them about that, and we've been trying to convince them that they shouldn't have it, and it's something called launch parity. It effectively means that if your game launches on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, or PlayStation Vita before it launched on Xbox One, you're not allowed to launch. You have to get an exception for that. We pulled a sort of a trick, sort of a mean one. We got the contract that said that, and then we signed with Sony, so that we had a pre-existing clause in our contract that prohibited us from signing something that had launch parity, so they had to drop that. But we're really aware that we as Vlambeer can pull that, and a lot of indie developers just starting out cannot, right? And as an indie developer, you just don't really have the resources to do 2 launches at once, especially not on 2 consoles. I mean, we were stuck in certification with Sony for 8 months on Luftrausers. We had a perfectly working build, and all we needed to do is check all the little boxes with all the little rules, and there's pages of them. Like, there's a lot of them. A lot of studios just don't have the resources or the bandwidth or the people to launch on 2 consoles at once. So they would end up launching with Microsoft first, which is also a problem because that means they're launching on a platform with worse rules first. So we don't want that either. So here's this weird situation where people are trying to get rid of this launch parity clause by signing with Sony first, which is not actually helping Microsoft, right? And I want ID at Xbox to succeed, so I want them to get rid of that clause. I want to make sure that indie developers go with a platform first because they like the platform. Or in most cases, they will probably still manage to release simultaneously, but I just don't want any studio to get in any big trouble because of launch parity. And it's such a simple rule to drop. Like, it would not do it. Like, they would literally just have to say, you know what, you can launch on any platform in any order. You're independent. You get to make your own choices. Like, that's all we want. We want to make our own choices. And a lot of people say, well, but Microsoft gives you dev kits, and I'm like, yeah, and so does Sony. Like, that's not the defining factor. If you are a developer signed for those platforms, you get access to the exact same resources in both. But with one of them, you can't launch first, and that's a problem, right? So we're working on that. But I am really hopeful. I think ID at Xbox is a really it's a strong move by Microsoft. I think they execute it really well. It's surprising to see a first iteration of anything be as good as ID at Xbox is. I think Chris Charla has gathered a really good team around them. I still like Sony better. I mean, I've built more of a relationship with the Sony people. Like, there's somewhat more trust involved, but I genuinely believe that Chris Charla can pull this off. So I'm really excited for that. And we're talking about Nuclear Throne with them, and I definitely want to launch on ID at Xbox. I can say that. That is something that we're likely going to do regardless of what happens, but if we can get them to drop launch parity, I will immediately go and full out say that Nuclear Throne is going to make it to Xbox One. So we'll see.
Okay, we're talking about 2 platforms there. There's a third. There's a third. And nobody's really talking about them at the moment, but they are kind of slowly building up ahead of steam when it comes to indie games, and they are starting to kind of bring a more diverse range of experiences, not just the kind of the first party titles that they're famed for. I mean, what kind of negotiations have you had with Nintendo, and what's that working relationship like?
So Nintendo also has a face in indie games, and that's Dan Edelman. He's also a wonderful guy, and he also really cares. Nintendo is an interesting company. They have roots that are unlike the other companies, and the biggest problem with Nintendo at the moment is A, most of their consoles don't have middleware, and B, they are not quite willing to give out dev kits to developers. Like, they're willing to loan them for a limited time, which is sort of free-to-play dev kits, and I don't want to do free-to-play dev kits. So we've been talking to them about getting our games on their platform. And we might actually be pretty close to seriously talking about that, but it's a weird situation to realize that Nintendo still looks at the world the way it was 5 years ago. And the way the world was 5 years ago, the difference with now is that back in the days, being on a console was a major advantage, right? It was an additional platform that you could launch on. And developers sort of needed that, right? Nowadays we're in a world where the majority of your revenue is going to come from Steam. Like, it's always going to come from Steam, with small exceptions. Like the Behemoth, you know, they're big Xbox. Like, they're going to launch an Xbox and they're going to do perfectly fine on there. But in the majority of indie games, they're going to launch on Steam and they're going to do best. So when we commit to a console platform, when we commit to a console launch, we're basically committing months of our life to getting a game to work on another platform and then seeing a really, really tiny return on that, usually. And for a lot of indie developers, that's not something they can do. Like, that's really, really hard. So we're not talking about the honor of being allowed to develop for a platform anymore. We're talking about the convenience of also launching on a platform, right? It's not so much that they're doing us a favor as developers are doing the platforms a favor. And I know that's a really big statement to make, but that's the reality of how things are. Because you look at the consoles at the moment, how many AAA studios do we have left at the moment? Like big name AAA studios. It was 100 a few years ago. We're down to like 30 at this point. There's not that much left. And if you want content, you need to get content from everywhere in the industry. Like, you've seen it with the Xbox and PlayStation 4. The only reason there are any games launching at all on those platforms at the moment, the only thing that keeps games coming to those platforms is the indie games. Because the big games, like, somebody made a joke last week, a few weeks ago at the BAFTAs, and they said, last year 2 new consoles launched, and if we wait a bit longer, maybe some games will launch as well. And I'm afraid that that's kind of true. Like, there are not that many games that are available for the platform. So indie games are going to be the games that, at this point, even the biggest AAA game fans are going to see as sort of a thing that they can play between AAA games. For those that play indie games, it's great because there's a lot of indie games coming out. But it's not the old relationship between platform and developer anymore. And it's the same thing with publishers, by the way. Like, it's not an honor to have a publisher anymore. It's actually, you know, it can be useful. But if you don't want to use them, don't use them, right? So things shifted a lot, and I think Nintendo is slowly starting to catch on to the idea that no, developers won't make a game because it's such an honor. They will make a game if it's convenient, if it's a thing that they can do without investing both money and time and mental sanity for going through another one of those checklists, through all the paperwork. Because launching a game on Steam, you know, you sign a bunch of contracts. One of them is a non-disclosure agreement, and one of them is about the game specific, and you sign all those things. And you get set up with everything. You upload the game, build of the game. You test it, and you launch it. Like, that's literally what you can do. With Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony, you have to go through certification. There's a whole bunch of paperwork. You have to do submissions of your content, like what is your game, what is it like, how is it special, what is interesting, all of these things. You have a whole bunch of meetings with them about launching a game. They go through cert, which takes a tremendous amount of time, and there's a whole lot of silly rules about how the game should work and how the game should work. You know why there's still a start screen in so many games? Why you have to press start on screens? It's because you need to figure out which controller the player is holding. It's a rule. Like, you can't skip it. You can't just assume that all controllers are the same. You have to figure out which one the player is using, which is why you have to press start at the beginning of every game. It's ridiculous, but that's the way it is. And there are a lot of those rules. Like, there are so many that it literally delayed Luftrausers by 8 months. And this is a game with 7 colors and airplanes, right? So this is a lot of work. Launching on a console is a lot of work. And I think to make that worthwhile for us, Nintendo should probably, you know, help us out a bit. And they haven't been doing that so far. I think they will, because I think they realize that it's not the way they think it is anymore. And I would be really excited, because I would love to have my games on 3DS and Wii U, even though I don't actually own a Wii U. I like my 3DS. I like Street Pass. I think it's really clever. I'm really happy that I brought my 3DS today. I forgot it yesterday, and I'm just like, I'm missing out on all these British Street Passes. I'm like, oh, God, that's good.
So one of the games, you mentioned another platform, the last platform we're going to talk about now, quite a lot during that last answer, and that's Steam. Yeah. I mean, there are pros and cons to Steam that we were talking about yesterday. I mean, obviously the openness of the platform and the fact that it is pretty much the home for indie games. You know, it's kind of, it really has brought to prominence the it's not a genre, but you know, that kind of, those kind of more boutique games. Yeah. But there is a dark side to it, and that is kind of splitting the Steam audience, and that's how some people are dealing with Steam Early Access. Because I mean, I know you guys are doing Nuclear Throne through Steam Early Access, and you're being very specific, and you've done Steam Early Access on purpose with very deliberate goals in mind. But some people aren't necessarily using it in that manner. So can you talk to us about your opinions on Steam Early Access and maybe Steam as a wider platform?
Steam Early Access is an interesting one. It's really undefined, and like a lot of things Steam does, it's an experiment, right? They, like everything they do, they just sort of release something and they see whether it works and then improve it over time. And I think with Steam Early Access that might have been problematic because it's undefined. Like you get into Early Access and there's no rules about what you have to do. And for us, Early Access means that we want, for Nuclear Throne, what we want is we want people that really like that type of game, people that are design-minded or that are willing to support a developer. We want them to play the game. We don't want anybody else to be playing the game yet because it's not done. Like we don't want people to play a game that isn't done unless they know what they're getting into and they specifically want that, right? So for us that means we're doing no sales. Like it's actually more expensive now than it's going to be after launch. It's only $1 or $2, but there's a bit of a premium there. We're not doing any major marketing. We're just doing our live streams every Tuesday and Thursday, and then releasing an update on Saturday. Like there's a schedule. People know what to expect, and people know that we're not treating them as beta testers, and that's a really big deal because asking people to pay $13 to test a game for us sort of doesn't make sense. Like that's all wrong. That's the wrong way around, right? Like we're talking about something that you used to get paid for. And now they should pay for it, and that's all wrong. Like we think that is absolutely awful, and we think the idea of having a game in development that you have in a sale is also all wrong. Like that's community building, and you do that after your game is done. You don't do that under the nomer of early access. So not having those rules is really, really annoying because a lot of people are exploiting it for various reasons. And they're uploading broken games. They're uploading games that are in alpha, and some are uploading games that are in beta. Some are uploading games that are completely unstable, and some are uploading games that are stable. So you don't know what to expect. And that's the problem, because if you're throwing down $13, you want to know what it is you're getting. And you don't. And that was a really rough reputation to fight against. Like, how do you make sure that you explain to people that we're doing early access right? Like, and how can you claim that, right? It took us way longer than we expected. And we never expected early access to have such a bad reputation. And I hope they sort of like come back on that, because we've been enjoying it a lot. Like Steam Early Access has been great for us, and just having people play the game and being able to watch Let's Plays shows us what people like about the game and how they interact with the game. And we see them doing things we don't expect, and we go like, we need to, like, that needs to be a thing. Like we need to like tweak that to make it feel even better, so that when anybody does that, when that one person in the world figures out that one thing, that is going to be really, really fun, and that they're going to feel great about it. So we're just watching people. Like, we update on, we live stream on Tuesday and Thursday, and then update on Saturday, and every other day we're just watching Let's Plays, and we're watching videos and seeing how people play the game while developing the game, and it's great. Like, it's amazing that we can do that now. And now we just really hope that that early access wouldn't have such a bad reputation. And I think a lot of that is just, you know, exclude early access games from sales, because why would you do that? Like, why would you have a sale for a game that isn't done yet? All it's going to do is, a lot of people are going to buy the game. Yes, you're going to earn a lot of money potentially, and then people have it sitting in their Steam library and not play it. Right? That's not early access. Early access is, here's a group of people that really care about games, that really care about this specific game. They want to play it. They're willing to pay more for it, or less, depending on however you do Steam Early Access. But even that difference, right, is annoying. Like, for what game are you paying more, and for what game are you paying less? Are we going to upset people when we lower the price afterwards? Like, we don't know. We're trying to communicate as clearly as possible, but we don't know. And neither do they, because they don't have any prior expectations of how Steam Early Access works. So it's the equivalent of walking into a store and buying something and not being quite sure what's in the package. And I don't think that feels good. So.
Do you think it comes down to like a culture clash, if you will, the kind of the best and the worst of Steam all at the same time? The best being the openness of the platform, the availability of games, and the fact that they are really positive giving voice to games, and the way that they bring value to the shop front, and then the sales culture, which, while some people would argue that that's a great thing, it also has another side to it.
Absolutely.
And perhaps is there that clash of cultures the root of the problem, and how do they fix it, in your opinion?
I don't. So this is one of the things. Everybody's always scared of fragmentation, right? And I don't think that would be a problem. I think that would be perfectly fine. The thing that Steam does really, really well is the Steam library. Like, you have so many games in your Steam library, that it becomes hard to sort of not do that. And Steam is really open in giving keys to developers. You just say, I want this many keys, and usually they will just approve that, and you'll get that many keys. Which is great, because it means that with your Humble bundle purchase, a developer can give a Steam key, right? Or with your purchase wherever, you can get a Steam key. And that just means that you have another game in your Steam library, and they lock you into Steam that way. It's clever. It's really, really clever. On the other side, they add value through sales, which is also really, really clever, because effectively they're saying, here we have millions and millions of gamers. They're all willing to buy your game. It's just a bit too expensive now, right? So if you lower your price a little bit, we'll put you on the front page. And nowadays, that's not even, they don't even do that anymore. There's like processes for that. And then people buy your game. And it's right. That's right. That's the way things work. There are problems with that. I mean, we've seen it on iOS. The expectation, the growth of free-to-play is directly linked to people expecting lower prices for games. And that's something that we're going to see more on Steam. And the only reason we're going to see that more on Steam is because a lot of people don't necessarily make money to make games. Like, they make games to make money. And as soon as you do that, like, the best way to earn money on iOS at the moment is free-to-play. Like, we made Ridiculous Fishing, and we explicitly made it premium. We're like, we're not going to deal with that stuff. We're just going to make a good game. We're going to charge $3 up front, which is on iOS is a lot of money. Then we're going to release it. If we had made it free-to-play, we would have had like 6 or 7 times the amount of money. We would have been really, really unhappy about ourselves. And I think on Steam you're going to see more and more free-to-play, because if the price that people want to pay for games gets closer and closer to zero, it becomes harder and harder for companies to make money, because you need to sell it to more people. If you need to sell it to more people, you need to have more discoverability, and discoverability is already a problem on Steam. Like, how do you find the good games, right? So if your game is free, everybody can try it. And if everybody can try it, you need to find another way to earn money. The way people do that is free to play. So I actually worry about that. I worry about the direction that sales culture is driving games, and I think a lot of people that are upset about free to play are also people that would buy a lot of games for, you know, a few cents in Humble or in whatever. You know, I wish there was a good way to explain that those two are directly correlated. Maybe this helps. But yeah, driving the price down to zero. There's a guy in the industry that theorizes that that's the natural state for games to be. Is for games should be free, and then you find other ways to earn money. And everybody that says games should be free, like, games take a lot of effort to make. They take a lot of time, and in a lot of cases, they take a lot of money to make. Even for an indie company, like we're talking about months and months of salary. Even like in some cases, for Luftrausers, years of salary. And we need to take care of ourselves. We need to pay for our rent. We need to pay for our food. So we need to earn money. And we genuinely believe that you can charge for a game what you feel it's worth, right? So we will charge $13 for a game. But if people stop buying $13 games because, hey, I can also buy this $6 game, you know, and we're not going to be able to do that anymore. So we would have to go down to 6, and then people go to 3, and then we'd have to go to 3, and then people all go to pay what you want. Then we'd have to go to pay what you want. Unless we're really stubborn, which in our case is probably true. We'd probably just keep charging and just hope that our fans, which, you know, are lovely and thankfully numerous nowadays, which is amazing, we just trust them. And we honestly depend on those people, on our fans, to be able to do this at all. But we know we're in a really lucky position. We know we're in a special position. And we are really thankful for that. But we also realize that that's not the reality for a lot of indie game companies, and they wouldn't have an option. So there's a dark side, and the dark side looks a lot like iOS. So if Steam gamers don't want iOS-like things, and, you know, maybe skip a sale once and pay for that one game you really, really like without getting the 4 others, help the developer that way and give us hope that we can just charge what our games are worth.
Do you think maybe Valve and Steam has a responsibility to perhaps calm down the number of sales, because there's constant sales now on week-long sales. They've just opened it up, I believe, where they've which completely changes things up, where people are now completely in charge of their sales. They just need to kind of log it, and it's almost an automated service. Do you think perhaps the answer is that instead of giving people more freedom to discount their games and to make them cheaper, they need to perhaps value their own brand and their own platform a little more accurately, and make sure that the value of games doesn't drop out of the bottom, as you said?
I think the problem with this is Steam has two responsibilities. They have two types of consumers, and the one consumer they have is the consumer. The other consumer they have is us. Like they have to deal with both of us, and they have to find the perfect balance. And effectively, what they're saying, and what they're saying in increasing ways, is keep us out of it. Like, we have a storefront. You put your games on there. Do whatever the hell you want. You figure this out. We'll just sit back and we'll let you handle this. And Steam has always been like that. If you upload a broken build of your game to Steam, they're not going to get upset. Like, they will send you an email like, hey, a lot of people are complaining. You should probably fix this. But if you want to blow your reputation on Steam with a broken build, hey, sure, go for it. We might not take your next game, but hey. And that's really special about Steam. Like, that openness, that ability for developers to do as they want is really, really great. But the force that we're talking about here are not controlled by Steam. If they were the more expensive of the stores, people would just go to the cheaper store, right? Because, of course, you only have X amount of disposable income. Like, it's not as if you can spend like hundreds of dollars on games. You can only buy X amount of games. And in many ways, buying games cheap allows you to play more games and figure out what you want more, right? And to find interesting games that you would otherwise not play. Right, so there are advantages to it. There's just also the other side, and I think that Steam deciding that for developers would be problematic. I actually think the direction they're going in is really, really great. But it also means that maybe it's time for something either more curated again, where there are specific games that are just worth like this amount of money or more. Instead of focusing on the games that are worth less than €10, you know, because you have like the little under €10 category. You don't have the here's a premium game, and I mean, people are finding more and more ridiculous ways to deal with the lower prices. Some people are charging like over $100 to get access to a game, and I'm like, that doesn't quite make sense. Like that. Sure, you get a lot of entertainment out of a video game, but come on, $60 is a lot of money to ask from people. And yes, you can say like it's closed, but like. Or that you only want the good, like, enthusiast people in your beta. We do that, and we do it at $13. Like, that sounds way more reasonable than saying, like, only people that can spend $100 on a video game this month can play this specific game. That upsets me a bit.
Sometimes those kind of deals are kind of written in to kind of create parity to maybe Kickstarter backers. So people who've supported games through that method then don't feel cheated that somebody can then go on Steam 3 months later and get access to the same game that they paid $100 to access, or £100 to access. They can get it for half the price or a third of the price or whatever. So they have to kind of retain some fairness. But I see your point.
Kickstarter is an interesting one. Okay, Kickstarter is not a store. You don't buy a game there. You don't have the same rules as in a store there. What you do on Kickstarter is you back a promise. You don't buy a product. Like, yes, you get that, but what you're doing is you're saying, I want to pay X amount of money to support this idea, to hope it comes to fruition, right? Like it's not a single transaction. It also doesn't mean you become an investor. You still don't have anything to say about the way a company runs unless the company does that. And I mean, this was the same thing with the whole Oculus Facebook thing. A lot of people were upset because they paid money for a Kickstarter that then sold out to Facebook. And I can see why you would have that emotional response, but this is literally what the publishers are in all the time. Like, this is what they do, is like they back things in the hope that it works out, and then when a bad game happens, like, they still have to launch it, because we're talking about people that invest $100 each. A publisher invests millions and millions of dollars into AAA video games. If something goes wrong, they still have to launch, right? They can't just be like, this is terrible, let's just throw away the few $millions. Like, that's not a thing they do. And Kickstarter has that really weird situation where people become mini publishers without actual control over the product because nobody is single-handedly investing in it. Like with Oculus, that was already pretty well funded before the Kickstarter happened. So effectively, even if people got stuck in Oculus, they still wouldn't have anything to say about what happened. And personally, I actually think the Oculus Facebook deal is pretty clever for Oculus. I'm not sure what Oculus is going to do in the future, but all I know is that they created an interface for developers that we can use to create 3D games. And we've got Morpheus, we've got a bunch of other stuff coming up. If they make it really bad with Facebook and they start data mining and all this stuff, we'll just use a competitor. Like, that's fine. Like, the important thing is VR is a thing now. Like, that's great. Like, there's like partnering up with Facebook just gives them such a big mind share in the public space, and Facebook can make people hear about VR. They can make this a big thing. As can Sony with Morpheus. So I'm excited for that. Like, I'm genuinely excited for that partnership. And if they make it bad, we'll just go with the competitor. Like, I don't care. Like, VR is cool. Like, let's do VR. Let's not talk about Oculus. Let's talk about VR as a thing. And I think for as VR as a thing, this is great. But the same thing with Kickstarter. What you talked about is if you back a product for $100, if you back a project for $100 on Kickstarter, you're paying X amount for the game, and the rest for supporting. And you get a bunch of extra things for that, and that's fine. $100 for a game on Steam is not okay. Like, I just don't think it's okay, because there's also a level in most Kickstarters that is $15 that also gives you the game. If that's what the game is worth, if it's $15 and the rest of that is you pledging to the idea, deal with that. It's $15. Yes, you paid $100. You did that to make the game true. You did that because you believe in it, you believe in the creators, you believe in the vision, you think that gaming should be more like that. That's fine. Vote with your wallet. But don't get upset if other people don't want to pay that exact same amount, right? Because the game is available for $15. It's going to be available for $15. And to exclude a lot of people from that game in such a draconian manner, like $100, that's... For a lot of people, that's a large part of their disposable income. Like, a lot of gamers, that's what they can spend a month on crazy stuff. And that means that they have no social life left. Like, you know, don't go to a bar and don't go to a movie, just play this one video game. I think we can do better than that. So that's another one of those early access things. Like, I don't know how to deal with that, but I know that it is in many ways also a response to just like, how do we make money? Like, how do we make sure that we can run this studio? And I mean, again, we're in an amazing position where we have our fans, and we can sort of just make games and price them at whatever we feel is appropriate. And our fans know that we will pick the price that is right, that we feel is right, and thankfully we've never made a mistake with that so far, I think. At least based on the response from our fans, we've done pretty well. But it's a problem. Like, pricing is a problem. It's an interesting problem. Kickstarter is wonderful. It's also problematic. Steam is great. It also creates a monopoly on PC. What Sony is doing is wonderful. A lot of like big indies now have access to a console platform. It also means that the smaller indies are easier to overlook now because you already have 100 great indie games on Sony. So how do you get the smaller ones in there? What Microsoft is doing is wonderful, but they have launch parity. What Nintendo is doing is kind of weird, but it's getting better. Like, everything has two sides. And the thing is, the industry is constantly shifting. Things are changing. Things are getting better. They're getting worse. The power that we as independent developers have is that we're small. We're nimble. We can change. We can change with the currents. We can change against the currents. We can make things happen. We can be the first people to jump in on something. That adaptability is such a big part of why indie games are interesting, why they're interesting, and why we can create such weird, crazy games in the first place. And whatever happens to the industry, like, my hope is that there will always be independent developers that do crazy stuff. And as long as that's true, like, I can't get that worried about, you know, the state of the industry. We're in a golden age for indie games. Like, there are more creators, more diverse creators, more creators of every background, of every gender, of every race, that are making games. And that's just really exciting, because it means that in the next few years we're going to see increasingly different, increasingly interesting, increasingly new games, ideas that we've never seen before. Ideas as simple as, you know, Flappy Bird. Like nobody saw that coming, and it seems like such a simple game. But a friend of mine tried to clone it, just as a practice, as a design practice. Like, how is this game made, and why is this so interesting? And wow, there's a whole bunch of really, really clever stuff in Flappy Bird. Like, and you don't expect that when you play it. But this is somebody that has been living outside of the indie scene, outside of the gaming scene, the gaming industry at large. And because of that, they didn't have the same frame of reference. So they made something new, something that any developer in the past 30 years could have made, and nobody did it because nobody looked at the world the way this person did. Nobody looked at design the way this person did. That's exciting. That's a single person on the other side of the planet that made a game that nobody here could have made. What's next? I mean, who's going to make the next big thing that we here in the West or in Japan or in any of the big gaming countries cannot make? I mean, I'm excited for a lot of stuff that's happening here, don't get me wrong, like, but the more we have, the better. And regardless of all the stuff that's happening, all the good and bad stuff, like just the fact that we're getting more diverse creators into the industry is just, I'm excited. I love video games and I think it's going to go great places.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Peter.